Man, so excited to be with you this morning. This is still a part of our Trolling Hope for Hope series, but it's also our family reunion Sunday, which is really exciting. I was going to call it family meeting, but Elise was like, that's what you call when your parents caught you doing something really bad. That's like bad connotation. Don't call it family meeting, call it family reunion. I was like, all right, that's what we'll do. So family reunion is going to be a little bit different. We've restructured our service for this Sunday only. We're going to have the message in 3 segments with songs in between. It'll be really good. So get ready. It'll be exciting. Right now, I'd like to ask you to open up your phone and open up the First.church app, sign into the Connect pad, and just let us know you're here. And, you know, we're still trying to continue to use that as a cornerstone to build community here. We used to pass the Connect pads down the row, and that worked great. But because of COVID, we can't do that. And, you know, I know so many people love the way this church feels. And part of the way we foster that community is through the Connect pad. We can really do a good job of caring for you and loving you and remembering important events through that. So anyway, really helpful for us when you do that. Also, we're going to go into a time of giving. And we'll talk more about where we're at budget-wise during our family reunion/meeting. And I just want to thank you guys for your continuing generosity to the church. Right now, we can't pass the plates, but you can give online at www.first.church/give. That's the way my family and I give. It's probably the most efficient way to give is an online recurring gift. You can also give in the lobby. But I'm grateful for you guys and your continuing generosity. Right now, we're going to go into a video, so go ahead and play it.
You know who I am. I'm an invitation to First Church, to community, to new life, to Jesus. You've seen me at some point, or you've heard from me. Maybe I was handed to your parents when you were a kid. A stranger at the grocery store handed me to you. Or maybe I badgered you for weeks in your mailbox. Maybe you were the one who picked me up, or the one who put me in your washing machine. I've seen your coat pockets and dashboards and wallets and purses and sweaty palms. And no matter how much time passes, days, weeks, months, in the end, I mean the same thing. I want to see you at church on Sunday. I want to see Jesus in you. Ultimately, though, I mean nothing. It's through you reaching kids, students, singles, parents, middle-aged, the retired, people from all walks of life. You reach people, try church one day, and realize that church is not what they thought it was. You reach people generation after generation. I'm just a piece of cardboard, but so long as you keep sending me out, I'll hang out in mailboxes, on countertops and refrigerators, trash cans and desks, because it's worth it. Your destiny was changed because Jesus found you where you were at. People need to hear about Jesus through us, through you.
Well, today is a special day, and what we're doing right now is we're having this family conversation, and I want to give you some updates on where our church is at this point. First off, budget. We like to have that conversation at least once a year, just giving you some updates. And this year we were, I think, like $180,000 short of where we had prayed about being, and that was getting kind of scary and nerve-wracking and whatever, and we actually had some unexpected things happen. We had an estate gift that had been tied up in a court for multiple years come through, and we also had a grant come through, and it looks like we're going to make budget this year. So that's like a big thing. Round of applause for that. Praise God. He's faithful and good. And this year we've been praying with the elders about where we want to be. And, you know, when COVID-19 came out and Hebron was in construction, and I was like, what are we going to do? But I'm just so grateful that we have a bunch of elders who are so cheap that they squeak when they walk. Thank God for these Dutchmen. Because they said, we can't do Hebron unless we can support it out of the budget we currently have. So we actually designed our budget to be able to support Hebron. We're a super efficient church compared to our peers in the community and in the country. And I'm so grateful for their stewardship and guidance. I mean, they are cheap, but they're also super generous, wonderful men too. I want to affirm that. And so our budget is going to be exactly the same next year as it was this year. That's a decision that we made. We've been expanding our budget, obviously, because we've been growing. Our church has grown more than 7-fold pre-COVID. But our budget has definitely not, because we're getting more efficient each year. So that's good. That's a big challenge for us, but we're going to do it. We're going to find a way. And Hebron is super exciting right now. If you don't know, our church was running about 1,600 pre-COVID, and post-COVID, prior to this week, we were in the low 700s in person, and then another 350 online. And that's okay compared to our peer groups in the country. We're actually doing well, and that actually works out well too because of COVID restrictions, CDC guidelines, and everything else. We have really been working to make it so that we still have 6 feet of separation. So if somebody right behind you were to have COVID-19 and you knew it, you technically wouldn't have to quarantine because mouth to mouth you're 6 feet apart. So that's been our hope, and because of that, some of our services have been like bordering on that, and we want to keep generally in here under 200. And so that's been a big challenge for us. We've been having conversations about adding another service, and you can keep your heads or your minds tuned into that, your ears tuned into that, because if we do that, we'll announce it, and it'll probably be like a 7:45, 9 o'clock, 10:15, 11:30 type of deal or whatever. We'll figure that out. Those were not the service times, whatever they'll be, and then 6 p.m. But this is just rough guesstimate right now. But I'm grateful for Hebron because we need the space, you know what I mean, to continue to social distance, and that's a really good thing. If you haven't seen that building, it looks fantastic. It looks really, really good. I'm grateful for your continued generosity for that. And here's something really cool that I have to announce. In a post-church community. This is a church community, so there's lots of people that go to church, they're engaged with church, and if there's somebody that doesn't go, they probably grew up in church and went away. Hebron is different. It's a de-churched or post-church community where people are one generation separated from a church engagement. So it's a little bit harder and different to invite people to that kind of church engagement there, and so we needed to develop a different strategy, and what I wanted to do was create a neutral space that was sort of closer to church, like almost like going, but it wasn't like a full Sunday experience. And a lot of churches around the country do that, and the strategy we've been looking at is doing like a coffee shop there. We've been talking a little bit about it, and I ended up meeting with some people who were involved with a franchise called Rise and Roll, and they make Amish donuts. They're really, really good. They're delicious. They're whatever. And we've been talking about, could we get a Rise and Roll coffee shop just during the week, not on the weekend, not on Sunday, but, Monday through Saturday, 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. or something like that in there. And it looks like we might be able to do that. So that's like big round of applause, like, yes, awesome. Barring, if you guys have some concerns about it, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to have a conversation, but because this is a family conversation, just want to engage with you, want to let you know that's what we're considering. And I think it'll be a really cool thing to have that there. And I'm just grateful for your continued partnership in that. And any proceeds that we would get from that would be given back to the community of Hebron. Once we've covered the expenses, it would go from that. So it wouldn't go to the church. It would just go straight back to the community, which is really, really cool. We're excited about that. And just please be praying with us, because I think we really need this space. So I'm grateful for it. Now, today I want to talk about this community and this context that we're in. It's interesting that almost every community is built by the faithfulness of a few great families. And you might not know this, but when you look at almost every city in America, it was really guided by a few really influential families. Now, growing up, my nickname was JJ. My name is John Juro Hill, but people called me JJ Hill. And in Minnesota, the Twin Cities were mostly pioneered by a man named James J. Hill. And James J. Hill was also known as J.J. Hill. And I found that kind of remarkable because he was a railroad tycoon and he did so much for the cities, and we shared a name. Now, he built this big old mansion, and when he died, he donated it to the Catholic Church. And when the Catholic Church was done using it, they actually donated it to the Historical Society. And as elementary school students, we would always go and tour this house like once a year. I mean, we went there a ton. I don't know why that was a museum place to go to, but it was the first house in the area that had electricity, and he actually paid to provide electricity and infrastructure to much of the Twin Cities, which is kind of cool. And this one family had this huge impact on our cities, and I was always like, that's my relative. Not really at all. We're not related, but in my mind, I felt like we were. And it's just remarkable that 106 years later, we're still talking about James J. Hill's influence in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Like, it's a really, really big deal. That's a legacy that he left because he wanted to invest in that community. In fact, every city has families that have done this. In Chicago, there are families that early on have had a huge impact on the city, and some like maybe not so good. I'm not gonna say any names, but the Dailies or whatever. But the Ogdens, the McCormicks, when you read about the history and the investment of these families into that community, I think a lot of us, we look at situations like this, we think, well, must be nice. To have a family like that, to have it all. And we imagine, when we think about their legacy, they're sort of like a white version of Floyd Money Mayweather, just making it rain everywhere they go, walking around with money bags and throwing it all and whatever. But that's not it at all. We look at that legacy and that's what we imagine, but really, these are families that were uniquely faithful. We read their stories, and of course, their attributes are what you would expect. They were faithful, hardworking, modest. They endured faithfully generation to generation, and yeah, there was some good timing, but one of the attributes that most influential families, these founding families of these great cities that you see, is a love for the Lord and a love for God's people. And it's kind of interesting to see these families. Now, there were lots of other really wealthy, influential families in the Twin Cities, but we don't remember their names because they do what they did. You know, they ran with their friends. They built lots of houses everywhere. They weren't faithful to the community. But James J. Hill was this remarkable family. 106 years later, we talk about him because he reinvested in the community. He did lots of civil service. He was engaged. He loved the Lord. He built churches. It's amazing to see how much a few families can do. And you know, today a lot of us were like, well, yeah, I'm not that rich. But I mean, technically, as far as your standard of living, you're probably better off than James J. Hill was. As far as the amount of freedom that you have to do what you want to do, the amount of comfort that you have in your life, you would not want to trade your life for his, no doubt. And we get to choose what we're going to do with what God has given to us as we invest time, money, effort, life into our community. And it's kind of amazing just to see what a difference that makes. You know, in our city, the businesses, the streets, the parks, the churches, the blessings have lasted generations from a few families that have continued to invest. You know, when I lived in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the funerals that were there for older people were really small. And that's because people moved around. They weren't faithful to a community. You know, they move all around. You go to a funeral and there's, you know, for a great person who lived a great life, there might be 30 people there. Here, I was just at a memorial service for a man who had lived most of his life in this community, all his life in this community, and there were hundreds of people that showed up because he reinvested in that community. And I think so much of this impact is rooted in what Jesus teaches us in Matthew 22. Somebody comes up to him and says, "Teacher, what's the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important." And I'm like, Jesus, that's clear as mud right there. The first and greatest commandment, a second is equally important. It's like, wait, Jesus, wait, is this the greatest or not? I don't understand. Anyway, love your neighbor as yourself. The whole Bible is summed up in these two commandments. Jesus says, look, you want to know the whole Bible? Pretty simple. Love God, love people. 2 commandments. That's the whole thing. That's the whole deal rolled up into one. And I think most churches have a tough time balancing both of these. I think most churches have a tendency to skew towards one or the other. But the call is both at the same time. Love God, love people together. The greatest commandment and the other one's equally important. I think some churches have a tendency just to focus on loving each other. And the message of Jesus and its power is lost as it turns into a plan not about spiritual freedom, but about social liberation. Social liberation theology is heresy, right? Because when you just focus on loving people without God in the picture, like that's not Christianity. That's wrong. Church becomes a social movement, not a spiritual one. Then there are churches that focus only on loving God, and that too is dysfunctional. Church becomes a powerful spiritual experience for a really small group of people who love being there and being engaged, and their kids are like, you're weird. You know what I mean? Because it's just one generation. We're not focused on reaching them, and the light is extinguished. The reality is we need both. Love God, love people. And I think right now, our church has been focusing a lot on loving God. We used to be good at balancing both pre-COVID, but in COVID, I think it's just been focusing on keeping our faith alive and engaging, you know, and you gotta watch online, and I can't let my faith die, and I gotta love God and whatever, and I understand that's part of it. But I think we've been losing sight of our God-given call to love one another. And this is huge and costly. I think the goal of our lives as humans, not necessarily as Christians, but as humans, is to spend our time well. And this generally gets classified as getting rich, because what is money? It's time, right? Time is money. It just represents that. And our goal is to get rich so that we can spend our time and do whatever we want, right? But I think the Christian goal is a little bit different. The Christian goal is not to get rich. The Christian goal is to enrich a community, and they're very different. Getting rich, hoarding time, money, and power for yourself is one thing, but enriching a community, I think, is way better. This is the subtle result of becoming a Christian. It is a change from loving yourself and trying to get rich to loving God and loving people by enriching a community. This church is 127 years old, and I think we've done a great job of both for many generations. I look at this community, and it's kind of remarkable. 5 of our original founding families from 127 years ago still go here. A huge portion of our older membership has been here since they were born. It's kind of remarkable, you know, when I talk to some of the older people at our church, I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and he said, John, don't ever underestimate what a church means. He says, faithfulness to this community has been so rewarding to me. He said, when I was younger, a lot of times I felt like it was a waste, but when I've been older, I begun to realize something. He said, John, my spouse, you know, left me, she died. And my kids grew up and we were engaged for a long time, but now they're gone. They've got their own grandkids and kids. And my grandkids, I was close with them, but now they got their kids and it's gone. But my church is for a lifetime. He says, I never understood what this would mean to me, what this community, my friends have grown and gone, but this community is for a lifetime. And it was just remarkable to hear him say the most remarkable and important institution in his life has been the community of the people of God in this local church. Remarkable to hear that. I've heard that sentiment from many people. And I want you to know this. I have no intention of leaving, but I want you to hear this. Pastors come and go, but a church is for a lifetime, right? A huge portion of our older membership has been here since they were born. And I love learning from them. This is a picture of Jim Toppin when he was a little kid. This is him 70 years later with his wife at his granddaughter's wedding the other day. They're a remarkable bunch. I hear he was quite a troublemaker. Just ask his Sunday school teachers, but they're all gone. So you'll have to ask him in heaven. But him and his brothers have been here for 5 generations. His son is here. His granddaughters are here. And his granddaughter just got married. So soon, I believe, his great-granddaughters will be here, right? Praying. I could list off a bunch of other names. Belcher, Hampshire, Toppin, Hoffman, Van Soest, whatever. The list goes on and on and on. And when you hear those names, many of us in this community think, well, success. When I hear those names, I don't think success. I think families that have been faithful to a call to love God and love people in their community. And it's easy to look at a legacy that has been many generations and think, well, it must be nice. Must be nice that they have that, as though it happened by random. But listen, it didn't happen by random. It happened by one person saying, I'm going to be faithful to this community, loving God and loving people together. And I refuse to pursue, fortune and whatever. What I want to do is I want to enrich everybody around me. I want to enrich the world. I want to love God and love people. And I know that some of you think, well, it must be nice. I mean, I could never have that. I don't have 5 generations that stand behind me helping build something great. I mean, my parents are gone and whatever and this and that. Listen, you might not be able to have it, but you can give it personally. That's something that you can give. Their blessing is a result of generations that love God and love people. That's what great families do, or rather, that's how families become great. And I think this is a double-fold calling for both of us. Number one, some of us are called to be faithful to a community. And some of us who have been a part of a great family are called to continue to pass that to the next generation. You coming here, it's not just about you getting a message that is good. It's not about you just coming here and hearing some and listening to some music and saying, well, I love God more. This is part of living out God's command for us in our lives. John 13:34, Jesus says, this is the Last Supper, his last meal with his disciples. He says, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you should love each other. Your love for one another is what proves to the world that you're my disciples. You don't know what it means to be a Christian? You want to know what a Christian looks like? It's somebody that loves other Christians and other people. This is such a big deal because I hear people tell me all the time, well, Pastor, I don't need to go to church to worship God. I can do that from my own home. And I'm like, no, you can't. Jesus literally says the manifestation of God in our life is loving one another. And if we don't come together, how can we love one another? I mean, this is a big deal. It just blows my mind. Oh, yeah, I mean, Pastor, I can just worship Jesus from my own. I can listen to Shine.fm, and it's pretty much the same thing, and it's just this and that, and blah, blah, and that's not what it is at all. When we love each other like Jesus told us to, we love God, yes, that's part of it, but we also love people. And that's equally important. We make the world a great place to be, we reap a blessing, and the community reaps a blessing, and everyone is enriched. This is why my family prioritizes loving people at this church. That's why we come here. It's not just because I work here. We would do this no matter what. When we come here, it's not about a great message. It's not about, oh yeah, that pastor really can. Listen. I hope that your commitment here isn't just because there's a message that's being preached. I'd hope you come here not just, pastor's not preaching this week, I'm not going. Stop. This isn't about getting better at life. It's doing what Jesus told us to do. We must continue to carry out the Great Commission, yes, by loving one another. Receiving love is a part of it, but it's giving love. I know so often it's like, well, I might not feel like going to church today because my faith is really strong right now and my kids, and we've just been busy. And let's just stay at home and have breakfast and we'll watch online. And please, online, not as good. It's just not. Because, your phone, and I'm just going to go on to TikTok for a little bit while I'm watching up there, and it's fine, and I'm really engaged. We're going to stop, Community together, inside and outside these walls, with Christians living life together, inviting others to be a part of it, is literally what Jesus calls us to do. This is a community together. This is a calling on our lives. All the research we have, as a band comes out on stage, all the research that we have emphasizes the value of church gatherings in America is directly related to the health and flourishing of our society. I think it's really interesting as we learn more about who Jesus is and the fabric of American society, all of God's words are vindicated. Our gatherings really matter. And in this COVID season, if you're low risk, I just want to ask you to consider being a part of our community again. If you're high risk, I want you to know I respect, I think about the woman who had the bleeding issue for many years. She was not able to engage with the local church, and that's okay. I don't want you to feel guilty, that's what you got to do. But if you're low risk, would you be a part of this community again? Not just for you, but for your grandchildren, for generations to come. This isn't just about getting rich in our own heart. This isn't just about learning about, expository verse by verse, implicit understanding as I do this, inductive Bible study, blah, blah, blah. Listen. That's not what this is about. This is about loving God and loving his people. As rough around the edges as we may be. What makes this place great, what makes this place a great community is families doing this together in covenant with each other. When we make profession on this stage, it's not just saying, I love God. It's saying I love God and love his people. We enter a covenant together to love his people, to love this community together. And I understand this isn't just about me getting my life richer spiritually. It's about enriching a community. I have a covenant obligation to love everyone here together, in community, in life. And I think this is one of those things where so often we trade what we want most for what we want right now. What we want most is a family after God's own heart. What we want most is to leave a legacy that lasts many generations. What we want now is to go camping. And I'm not saying that that's, a sin, that that's wrong. I think a lot of times we undervalue what it means to love God's people in a covenant community together. And I want to do this together. I want to love Jesus together. I want to call us back to the second great commandment that's equally important as the first. We love God and we love his people, just as he first loved us. Right now, the band's going to lead us in a song, and as they start, I just want us to really think about what it means to be a part of God's community and a part of God's family. Man, I'd ask you to go ahead and lead us.
Stand and worship with us. There is no fear, 'cause I believe. There is no doubt, 'cause I have seen your faithfulness, my fortress, over and over. I have a home found in your name. I have a strength found in your grace. Faithfulness, my fortress, over and over. Make way through the waters, walk me through the fire. Do what you are famous for, what you are famous for. Shut the mouths of lions, bring dry bones to life. Then do what you are famous for, what you are famous for. I believe in you. There is no fear, 'cause I believe. There is no doubt, 'cause I have seen faithfulness, my fortress, over and over.
Reaching people who are close to you but far from God is what I live for. Print 1,000,000 of me and send me out. But things have changed. It's gotten harder. Everything was great, and then COVID happened. Online church is good. You get the music and the sermon, you see it and hear it, but things are different. The longer people stay away from church, the easier it is to forget about the person who told you, I want to see you in church on Sunday. I want to see Jesus in you. The easier it is to say, I'm just not ready to come back yet. It's hard, but we need to keep reaching people. I can't do it alone. I need help. Your help.
He's right. We are in a different stage right now. And the mission of God is the same, but a change in context makes it feel different. And I think part of the challenge is choosing to follow Jesus in every new stage and place in our life. Joseph, if you don't know his story in the Bible, is a man who followed Jesus in many different stages. It's one of the most engaging and dynamic stories to read in the Bible, though I'm sure it wasn't engaging or dynamic for him because it was hard. he experienced a lot of change. And I kind of want to summarize his story because I think it speaks to us. It's a challenge to us. Joseph, if you don't know, was one of 12 brothers, and his brothers and him and their descendants would make up the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And his brothers were jealous of him because his dad favored him. And in their jealousy, this is terrible, this is horrendous evil, but they beat him, they threw him into a well or a cistern, and then they sold him into slavery, which to me is a fate that might be worse than death, to be betrayed by brothers like that. Genesis 38:28 tells us what happened. It says, so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and they sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt, where it's presumed he was sold as a slave. You know, it's interesting, when we read the Bible, we just read the words, we don't think that it's that big a deal, but I mean, that's terrible. Like, I read that and it's like, are you serious? That is awful. To have your brothers do you like that. Now, the Bible actually goes into another story about Judah and Tamar. It takes a break from Joseph's narrative, and then it comes back in Genesis 39, verse 2, and these are the very next words that we have about Joseph's life, and I find them remarkable. It says, the Lord was with Joseph. He was sold into slavery, betrayed by his brothers, and the Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Joseph was sold into slavery, and God was with him. That is pretty remarkable. And to me, it's a great reminder that God being with me doesn't mean that my life will be perfect or easy. In fact, sometimes God being with me will also include my life being terrible and difficult. God being with me doesn't mean that everything goes perfect. It can mean you'll face hard times. Joseph chooses to honor God in this new context, even though many would not have. I think a lot of us would be mad at God. God, how could you let this happen? I'm out. But Joseph chooses to honor God, and I think that's why the Lord was with him. Now he does really well in his master's house. He rises to second in command of his master's house because he's godly, he's a man of integrity, he's hardworking. But then his new master's wife, she sees him and she's a thirsty woman. And she looks at him and she says, I want that, right? So she comes on to him, she says, hey, I want you, like, come to bed with me. And Joseph is like, no, I can't do that. I mean, I love God and we're not married and you're married to somebody else. I refuse to commit that sin. And she, hell hath no fury like a woman spurned. She's never had anyone say no to her in her life. The Bible would imply that she was a wealthy and powerful woman. So she is so angry, she fabricates a story about Joseph that is not true. She accuses him of assaulting her, which was not true. Nobody believes Joseph, and he is imprisoned for many years. The Bible tells us, so he took Joseph and he threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison. Again, I find it remarkable. I find it almost an oxymoron. God was with Joseph in prison. Are you serious, God? What? I find it remarkable. I'd be frustrated with God. But Joseph makes the most of it. Joseph chooses to honor God in that place too. He honored God as a brother in a wealthy family. He honored God as a slave, and now he honors God as a prisoner. He makes the most of it. He makes friends in jails. He points people to God in jail while he's there over and over again. And even though he spends many years there, the Bible implies as many as 7 years in jail, ultimately, he has this, through an odd set of circumstances, chance to stand before Pharaoh, the ruler of the land. And he interprets the dream for Pharaoh. Pharaoh is so impressed with Joseph that he elevates him to the position of second in command of the entire nation of Egypt. God uses this man to save his brothers who had betrayed him. It's a super high-speed summary of a great man's life. But here's the truth. In every stage of his life, as a brother from a wealthy family, as a slave, as a prisoner, and as a ruler, Joseph chose to honor God, and God was with him. And I think the bottom line that really interests me in this story is it comes from this fact. At every stage of life, we have a tendency to revert to godlessness. And this is what makes Joseph's story so remarkable. Most of us would have been mad at God, right? That's what happens when something bad happens in life, when our heart is broken, when an issue happens, we get mad at God. God, I don't like you. I don't even know if you're with me. I don't know if I can follow you anymore. Joseph said, forget about it. I'm following you. Some of us, we have something good happen. What happens when something good happens in your life? You forget about God too, because you're focused on this new thing. That's the natural thing. At every stage of life, our tendency is to revert to godlessness. Why was God with Joseph? Why does it say God was with Joseph? I think it is because Joseph invited God into every stage of his life, in slavery, in prison, and as a ruler, he invited God into his life. Some of you might say, well, Pastor, we're reformed and once saved, always saved. It's the perseverance of the saints. Sure, I believe that too. But practically speaking, When I see people fall away from God, it's always in a new life stage. It's after a divorce or a bad breakup. It's life in college. It's life with teenage kids. It's when you become an empty nester. It's a new stage where you just sort of drift away. And I believe the calling of God includes us choosing to follow Jesus, not just once, but at every stage of our life. We say, Jesus, in this new circumstance, I choose to follow you. Many of us, when we were teens in youth group, we went on this crazy houseboat trip and we encountered God and we're like, I'm gonna follow Jesus forever. This is great, spiritual high. Some of us chose to do it. But for some of us in a new stage of life, we didn't rededicate our lives to Christ. And a once thriving faith that we had becomes what? A distant memory. Joseph chose to follow Jesus at each stage of our life, and I think we must do the same. Jesus actually talks about this in Luke 14 and verse 28. Jesus says, but don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? He says every time you build a new building, every time you begin a new stage, every time you start a new job in a new place and a new experience, you count the cost of following Jesus, and you need to decide ahead of time who you're gonna be in that new context, even in the small things. Parents, when your kid comes home to update you with something that upsets you, when you catch your spouse doing something that upsets you, when you have this experience, you need to decide, even in that small moment, I am going to follow Jesus in this moment. I am going to show this person grace and truth, because that's what love does. Young people, before you get out of your car at a party, you need to decide ahead of time who you're gonna be. I am not going to get drunk because I'm gonna honor God with my mind. I'm gonna honor God with my body. I'm not gonna bring sex to a place that's outside the context of God's plan for my life. I am going to point people to Jesus here. You need to decide to give that moment to Christ. And for big things especially big things, college kids, you need to decide who you're gonna be. I remember before I went to college, I talked with people. I wanted to learn what college would be like. And I decided ahead of time, this is the most John Hill thing, but I visualized what college would be like. I visualized what the temptation would be. And I said, Jesus, I resolve to follow you in this new stage of my life. Each semester, again, this is super John Hill thing to do, but I would look at my schedule and I would decide to follow Jesus. I would put church in my schedule. I'd put devotional time in my schedule. And I'd say, I'm gonna make church a priority. I'm gonna make God a priority. I'm gonna decide ahead of time who I'm going to be. I'd look at my schedule, and if there was an anthropology class in there where I knew there was a professor who'd be antagonistic to my core beliefs, I'd say, I resolve to honor Jesus in this class. I resolve not to compromise who I am in this class. Parents, before each stage with your kids, you need to rededicate your life to Christ. When your kids are in middle school, my parents did such a good job with this. I remember in middle school, all the traveling sports and all these extra opportunities, and I began to bloom into a pretty decent athlete. I was, a state contender for cross-country skiing. I was a pretty good sailor. And these sports in particular, cross-country skiing and sailing, which is a Minnesota sport, don't judge me, they really came into conflict with Jesus on Sundays, right? And my dad led me to choose on my own to honor Jesus, and I left those sports, right? Because I said, I will not compromise. We need to decide, parents, how we're gonna shepherd our children. My parents fought for my sexual purity. They fought for their son's sexual purity regularly. They actively presented a godly counter perspective to a very liberal human perspective on gender and sexual orientation to me as a kid, and I'm grateful for it. When your kids enter high school, parents, you need to choose who you're gonna be, and you need to dedicate that stage to Christ. Every stage of our life, we need to choose to follow Jesus. And I see so many families, man, when they're young, when they have young kids, we start off with great intentions, we come to Jesus. When you have little kids, you come to Jesus. You know why? Because let's be honest, little kids break us emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially. They just wreck you. They wreck your life on every level. It's so hard when you have those little itty bitty babies. It's like, I'm gonna die. I need Jesus now, right? But then as they get older and they get into what I call the golden era, where they can, be potty trained and brush their own teeth and change their own clothes, life becomes good. And what do? We never decide to walk away from Jesus. We just float away. We find new things because we didn't decide in that new stage to follow Jesus. We didn't count the cost. And suddenly we look back at our lives and think, how did we get so far from God? It isn't because we chose to walk away. It's because we didn't dedicate that new stage of life to Christ. Every stage. Parents, empty nesters, listen, when you are approaching your 70s, your 80s, you need to say, even as I am dying, I resolve to follow Jesus in this new stage of life. I refuse to give in to fear. I refuse to give in to conspiracy. I refuse to give in to anger and what it used to be. I resolve to follow Jesus in his great commission call in this moment. And here's a big moment for our church family. I think so many of us are discovering this new normal with COVID. For so many of us, so many things are being taken away and changing. And what we're discovering is that with a less busy life, things are okay. I think a lot of us are discovering, it's nice, family at home, whatever. The old temptations to avoid God's call are gone but they've been replaced with an entirely new set of temptations. And like Joseph, we're in a moment where we have to give this new phase of our life to Christ. We know that God is real. We know that something doesn't come from nothing. We know that we'll stand before Him at the end of our lives. We know that coming to church is a part of loving one another, and we have a covenant obligation to do that. We know that rejecting God is foolishness. But will we decide to follow Him right now? Normally, at church, different families face different new stages at different times, right? But this is one of the first times, at least in my ministry, where all of us are facing a new context, a new stage together. And we have to together count the cost and say, Jesus, as for me and my house, in this new time, we give it all to you. We give this new normal to you. This is what Joseph did. I think about James J. Hill. I read about his life. And it's so remarkable to me to see that at every stage in his rags to riches stories, he led his family to love God and love people in their community. And that's what made their life so remarkable. And I think for a lot of us, the reality is we haven't decided to follow Jesus in this new context. We didn't even know we needed to. But are we really trusting God with our fears, with our angers, with our resentments, with our worries, with our finances, with our stress, with our relationships? For so many of us, the answer is no. We have believed in God, and we might think we still do, but the reality is that in this season, so many of us have not decided to trust Him. The reality is we don't. Is it because God's promises don't extend to moments like this? No, they do. Pandemics like this have happened before. This pandemic is like nothing. It's like a mosquito bite compared to previous pandemics the world has faced. Nations have struggled and crumbled. I think the big question for us is, are we going to follow Jesus in this time that we have never faced before? When you look at your life, some of us online, we just think, well, I'm just not going back. And if you can't, you can't. I get it. But for so many of us, it's just, well, I'll just watch online, and play Candy Crush at the same time. Then we don't watch online. Then we get disengaged. And then we let this faith in this new part of our life die. And what was once a community that we were a part of, that was thriving, that it was defining experiences in our life, is a dying ember in our heart. And once more, the question is, will you follow Jesus? Will you give your life to Him now? 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. I'm asking you to pick up your cross once more and say, Jesus, I'm all in. I surrender all in this moment. I count the cost. I look at this new context, and I choose to follow you. I give you this time. I give you this place. I give you my fears for today and my worries about tomorrow. I give you my family and myself, and I choose right now, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's the call of God. The band is going to lead us in a song here, and I don't want this to be a moment where, we hear and sing a great song. I want it to be a prayer where we say, God, I surrender my life in COVID-19 to you. Let's sing together.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest, and without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you.
My purpose is still the same, just like your calling is still the same. Jesus commands us to tell everyone about Him, and no matter what changes come our way, keep handing me out, keep mailing me out, keep losing me in purses and backpacks and cars. Pioneer new events and ways to invite people to church on Sunday, because this is where life happens. I'm still sitting on countertops, dashboards, and refrigerators. Maybe people just need to be reminded that you're still here and you miss them. Don't stop. Be relentless. Don't give up on the people that are close to you but far from God. Together, we can get them back. And we won't stop at 1,500 people. We won't stop with 2 campuses. Let's keep inviting people to church until we see generation after generation become fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Will you invite somebody to church next Sunday?
I promise you guys, this is the last one. We're doing this one's short, but the last thing I want to talk about with our family is calling. And a calling is a really important concept. When I think about Joseph, when I think about great families that have changed the world, it's families that understand what a calling is. And a calling is something that is, I think, really misunderstood in religious circles. Many people assume that a calling is a piercing voice of God moment. I, God, called you into ministry now. Select few may experience that. But I've had people ask me, hey, John, when did you receive your calling into ministry? As if there was some great moment, as if God shined a light on me and, I was blinded for many days on the road to Damascus. But that was not the case. For me, it was a realization that the harvest was plentiful, that the workers were few, and that I could help bring in the harvest. I hope that some young people here today would understand that God is calling you. You don't need to have a voice ripping open the sky moment. There were some meaningful conversations I had with my dad, and I would say he moved through them, but no sky-splitting moment with an audible, blinding voice. About a calling, Paul says in Ephesians 4, verse 1, he says, therefore, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling. For you have been called by God. To the whole church in Ephesus and to the whole church here in Wheatfield, God says, all of you have been called by God to serve Him, to do great things for Him. Paul sheds light on what a calling is here. A calling is something that everybody has, but a calling is less about what you do, and it's more about who you are in all things at all times. In other words, a calling is a who, not a do. And I think so many of us are paralyzed by what we're gonna do for God with our lives. What am I gonna do? Should I be a doctor? Should I be a pharmacist? Should I be a police officer? Should I be a I don't know, God, what should I do? Should I be a pastor? I don't know. But you know what? A calling isn't about what you do. It's about who you are in all things at all times. God is so much more concerned about who you are in the little things. And I think it's funny because so often we imagine that we have complete control over all that, but if Joseph knows anything, it's that he doesn't have control over everything. It's just a matter of choosing to be faithful in every circumstance. As we look at the future of our church, there's a lot of uncertainty. We had planned on being at a very different place this summer. I had big hopes for different things unfurling and unrolling. And I have to admit, I was a little disappointed and saddened that some of our plans are not unfolding as I expected them to. I think it's rooted in a lie that I've sinfully believed, been tempted to believe. The lie that says God calls us to be important. The lie that says God calls us to do big, huge, flashy things. But I want to make this so clear here today. God does not call us to do big things. He calls us to be faithful in all things. Jesus continually praised people in a unique way. And a lot of times, we assume that Jesus said, well done, good and important servant. You did big things. Well done, good and successful servant. But that's not what Jesus praises in the Bible continually. There's one attribute that Jesus praises. What does he say? He says, well done, good and faithful servant, right? He praises faithfulness. Why is Joseph's story remarkable, powerful, and enduring? It wasn't because he was a great ruler and leader. There's lots of godly, great rulers and leaders in the Bible, but their story doesn't connect with us like Joseph says. Why does Joseph connect with us? It was the fact that he was faithful in all things at all times. He was faithful as a brother in a rich family. He was faithful as a slave. He was faithful as a prisoner. He was faithful as a ruler in all things at all times, in the valley and the mountaintop. When he was happy, when he was sad, when he was heartbroken, when his heart was full, he was faithful. And First Church, this is the conclusion of our family meeting. I believe that God is gently calling us back to faithfulness. Greatness comes from faithfulness for the generations. God is calling us to build a legacy that isn't just for us, that isn't about making our lives rich spiritually and emotionally. It's about enriching a community, enriching generation after generation with a vision for 100 years after we're gone. He's calling us to faithfulness. God is calling us to choose to be faithful in every stage of our life. He's calling us to sit back and say, God, in this time, in this moment, I may have followed you before, but I am resolving to grow more. I refuse to let my faith shrivel. I refuse to look back and say, oh, I was on fire for God back then, but now I don't know. No, he's calling us to be faithful in all things, at all times. He's calling us to be faithful right now. As we close, I'd like to ask you to stand. It's the last time I make you stand up. I promise. I know some of you with knee replacements are like, but Pastor, please, you know what I mean? Promise, this is it. This is it. I can't tell you that there won't be suffering ahead. There may be. I can't tell you that all the problems are gonna go away and things are gonna get better. I can't tell you that a vaccine is coming at this specific time, but I'm asking you to choose to follow Jesus once more in all things, at all times, in a new season, in a new context, with different pains and different trials. I'm asking you to choose godliness. I'm asking you to choose to rekindle your passion, to reignite your vision, to refocus your life. The calling of God on our lives is faithfulness. It's not a do, it's a who. Faithfulness to the generations is what has changed the world. Great families and great movements begin with small acts of faithfulness by normal people. And will you be faithful in this moment? Will you trust God with your fear and your anger and your uncertainty and your anxiety? Will you trust God with your frustration and your impatience? Will you trust God with your new normal and say, God, I will be faithful? In the fall, our church picks a word, that guides us for the year. I challenge each of you to pick a word that will guide you and bring meaning for your year. Pray about it, talk to God about it, pick a word for us this year. It's so funny, we were praying as a group and I wanted a different word, but everybody I prayed with was like, hey, I really think the word should be relentless. Relentless. I guess that sounds nice, relentless, whatever. What does relentless mean? It means we will not stop. I think it's been a prophetic word for us. I think it's been a guidepost for us as individuals, for us as a church. We will not stop. The temptation has been to stop. The temptation has been to cease, but we are relentless. I see a church that is reeling from change, from surprise, but now is the time to step up and step in again, to look at a frontier, to look at a new challenge, and to say, in this new normal, as for me and my house and my life and my family, we will serve the Lord. God is not just calling us to do great things. He's calling us to be faithful in all things at all times. Faithful in loving, faithful in serving, faithful in building his community, faithful in building his church, faithful in the Great Commission, faithful in giving, in trusting, in suffering, in sacrificing, in serving. 2 Corinthians 9:8, it says, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound, you will be faithful in every good work. Church, let's pray for faithfulness. Jesus, make us faithful. God, give us a vision for the generations and make us faithful to them. Give us a heart for your people, for your kingdom, for your world. Reignite a passion in our hearts. Jesus, as a church, we corporately yield this season, this moment, this time to you. We choose to be faithful in it, in all things, at all times, big and small. We choose to follow you because it's who you call us to be. In the name of Jesus, God's people said, amen and amen. Let's sing together about God's faithfulness.